All right, in the meantime, we're staying in California for the time being. Governor Gavin Newsom now taking questions on wildfire relief. Let's listen.
Cooperation and collaboration, that's the spirit to which we welcome him. I've said this many times, open hand, not a closed fist, and I will reflect on the frame of your question. We had a great relationship during COVID, well-established, well-defined. I don't think there was a Democratic governor in the country that worked more collaboratively with the President of the United States. That's my mindset when it comes to emergencies and disasters. No politics, no finger pointing. We're going to have the backs of the people in this state, and I hope the president comes back after his visit tomorrow and is here for not just the short run, but the long haul.
So Governor, the legislature said that it was poor form on your part to establish a special session of the legislature before he even took office to Trump-proof the state, that sent a bad message.
Well, the Trump-proof is someone else's words, not ours. I think it was rather prescient. We're already engaged in lawsuits, in litigation. He already is assaulted the 14th Amendment as a birthright citizenship. I think there's a likelihood of additional lawsuits as it relates to some of his executive actions, and we didn't have time to wait past his prologue. Not just my administration, which was just 2 years working with the Trump administration. The Brown administration had 2 years working with the Trump administration. Total, there was 122 lawsuits. We didn't initiate those lawsuits. They were in response to actions by the Trump administration. I thought it was important that we prepare for that, and I think by definition that preparedness has put us in a position where we can quickly move with the Department of Justice to assert ourselves against the backdrop of an assault on a lot of hard-earned progress here that goes back to Ronald Reagan. Goes back to the 60s and 70s and 80s. So you could do both things at the same time. Nothing personal. It's just reality and being prepared and having that experience.
How is it not, Governor, how is it not personal? You've just described him as an assault, putting an assault on the 14th Amendment. We know that yesterday in an interview, President Trump said that you are responsible for not bringing water down from Northern California to Southern California. Is it possible to isolate this, to isolate the fires, and to have a relationship and a dynamic with the president to help resolve this? And are you worried about the federal government not reimbursing the $2.5 billion?
Well, it's not, you have to ask him that question, not personal for me, any of those things. It's just fundamental policy disagreements on birthright citizenship. But on emergency preparedness, emergency management, there should be no daylight between federal administration and state and local representatives, and that's the spirit that defines today in the $2.5 billion, bipartisan. You had not just Tom Lackey, you had a number of other Republican representatives here, and we're grateful for them. We were there, their colleagues were there for other more conservative colleagues in more conservative parts of the state, up in Paradise and Campfire, and never even thought about it, never thought twice about that. So none of this is personal in any way, shape, or form. But it's, some people want to politicize things. That's just not our approach. And as it relates to reimbursements, I have all the expectation and belief that we'll be reimbursed for these dollars, and that we'll have the support of Congress and the President of the United States. I absolutely believe that.
What about some of the concerns about the president saying that there should be limits on the funding for California unless the state does some sort of water?
Well, it's some sort of that is confusing to not just you, but to every expert and everyone that's tried to review it. The State Water Project has nothing to do with the fires here. Nothing. Period. Full stop. It's not he said, she said. This is not just an assertion. It's a foundational fact. And I think it's really important in terms of how we express the reporting here that we deal not just with both sidesism. The State Water Project has nothing to do with water supply as it relates to water suppression for municipal systems. The state reservoirs are at or near record highs, and the issues around the Endangered Species Act have been issues that have been litigated and adjudicated and politicized for as long as I've been alive. They're not novel to this administration. They go back to the George H.W. Bush administration and litigation and lawsuits. So, again, that's why I take none of this personally. I just, with respect, think it's incredibly important that people know the truth, because it's very damaging when people believe such misinformation. And I don't mean it in a malign sense. Maybe the president just doesn't know that there's not a spigot that can be turned to solve all the water problems that he alleges exist that don't exist as it relates to the state water system here in Southern California.
So we're less than 24 hours away from his visit. You're saying you haven't had any contact with the White House at all?
Well, I haven't. I'm grateful, though, that he took our invitation to heart and that he will be here tomorrow. It's my understanding. I look forward to being there on the tarmac to thank the president, welcome him, and we're making sure that all the resources he needs for a successful briefing are provided to him. There's no limit to the resources we'll provide for that briefing. And as I say, I'm grateful that he appears to be coming out.
Plan on talking to him tomorrow?
Well, I certainly plan on being there at the tarmac and look forward to continuing to work, not just with him, the administration, as it relates to the disaster recovery, as it relates to our efforts to collaborate with multiple federal agencies over the course of the next many years as we organize our approach to immediately address the debris removal. We're working now with the Army Corps of Engineers. So there's a direct relationship to debris removal in the Trump administration, and to make sure that's done effectively, not just quickly, but effectively, and making sure it's done safely, and to make sure that we move heaven and earth as it relates to waiving permits and making sure we break down every barrier for recovery so people can move quickly to reestablish their lives.
Governor, as you've been seeing everything that's happened over the last few weeks, obviously LA is hosting all of these huge events coming up, the Super Bowl, World Cup, then the Olympics. Do you have confidence in the city's leadership that they will be able to pull off those huge events and prepare for them as they are dealing with all of this other fire recovery?
I do. We're unified, the county, chair of the Board of Supervisors, the mayor and mayor's office, but it's not just LA City. We're dealing with cities of Altadena, Pasadena, many incorporated and unincorporated cities. We're at a regional we're in a regional mindset as it relates to those games, statewide mindset as it relates to the World Cup and the Olympics as well. So I have all the confidence, and I think that's a galvanizing force. In many ways, it will only reinforce that sense of urgency and the imperative of working to one goal, one cause, and be even more unified. And that unification is not just from the paradigm of people in elected positions. It's also philanthropy. It's also some of our business leaders. And so we'll, as I said, a little preview, we'll be talking a lot more about that early next week. We have some big ideas in that space around LA Rising, around a much more aggressive philanthropic force and having verticals to support a recovery and support a rebuilding that's scientifically backed, that's climate considered, and that also considers the larger infrastructure needs of the Olympics and the World Cup. And I should note, we're grateful to the President of the United States for his support of the Olympics. And we're grateful for his comments recently that he made after Casey Wasserman met with him, that he wants to make this the most spectacular Olympics that have ever been held. And so there's no daylight with the administration on that. And I think in so many ways, it only reinforces my confidence that the president and Congress will be there for the American people that happen to live here in Southern California.
One clarification on the funding. Have you gotten any indication from the president's team that they are thinking about dialing back the 100% commitment that President Biden made, and perhaps only providing the minimum of 75%?
I haven't heard it. Look, I sincerely expect them to do the right thing, and that's the right thing to do.
Without Governor, without federal money, what happens to California? Let me just expand on what I just said. I have all the expectations they're going to do the right thing. That's what we do in this country. And there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of positioning. You guys are pros. You've been around. You've seen this. You saw it down here in Southern California, and before I was even elected governor in Orange County as it relates to reimbursements. I mean, you saw it at the Paradise Fire before I was even sworn in as governor. We're going to get this done. I expect Congress to do the right thing. I appreciate there's been a lot of Republican congressional representatives in California saying the right thing. You saw their representatives in the legislature do the right thing
That's the spirit that defines our time. So I'm not concerned about it. And it's why it's difficult for me to answer that kind of hypothetical. Forgive me. One second, just so forgive me.
You spoke about the Paradise Fire and other fires. There's been many fires up and down the state during your tenure in the office. Ounce of prevention, how to cure, and all of that.
Right.
We're talking about rebuilding.
Right.
So many Californians up and down the state are on edge now.
That's right.
Watching these images.
Yeah.
The fires are getting larger, seemingly.
Right.
The press conferences are getting bigger. The aid is getting bigger. What are we doing for prevention?
Well, we've done unprecedented work, and we'll have to do more. We've treated over 700,000 acres just in 2023. We've doubled the number of prescribed burns. I haven't increased modestly the budget for vegetation and forest management. I've 10x'd it. I took a $200 million a year baseline budget, and we've invested over $2.5 billion. I put $1.5 billion in the January 10th budget. We have provided unprecedented investments in forest management on federal forests. 57% of the land in California is federally managed, 3%, just 3% state. But we don't discriminate in terms of that support, just like we didn't as it relates to our approach and suppression on the fire, the Hughes fire yesterday, which is a federal forest fire. We have unprecedented investments in technology, procurement strategies, satellite technology, AI, LIDAR, 3D modeling, intelligence, weather, the ability to do things no other jurisdiction in the country can do, including the investments of 16 new helicopters and those Firehawks that were up there last night doing the suppression, and those Firehawks that likely saved large parts of Los Angeles. Those were all new investments. The pre-positioning that we did before the fires, the 120 engines, the 105 specialty teams, the dozers, the water tankers, were because of investments that 5 years ago we didn't have. We were unable to do that pre-positioning at the scale we're doing it because we made investments. We've doubled the budget at CAL FIRE. We're adding 2,000 more additional firefighters. This is a response to your question, not the kind of soundbite that works for you, but it's important for me to express these unprecedented investments. And I'll encourage you one additional thing. We laid out in a task force, a forest resilience task force, a detailed plan, 99 specific action items, and we have a dashboard that lays out the thousands of vegetation and forest management projects this state is doing. We established a shared stewardship council, a partnership with the federal government to provide support for aiding 500,000 of additional acres of federal forest vegetation management. We ironically did that during the Trump administration. By the way, I'm halfway to fully answering your question. The reason I say all this is to reinforce the point. The first action I took as governor of the state of California was an executive order to change procurement on vegetation and forest management. I followed it up 6 weeks later in Placer County and identified through a state of emergency, a declaration of emergency in Placer County, right near Auburn, California, to move 35 large-scale, high-profile projects to address the vulnerability of 200 communities. We've been at this for years and years and years, but I'll remind you of something that I know is inconvenient. We had the 3 driest years since statehood in 2020, 2021, 2022, followed by the wettest 3 weeks in our history that broke that drought. The extremes are unprecedented. There hasn't been a drop of rain of any significance, at least in 9 months here. It was 78 degrees down here. You had hurricane force winds, 99 miles an hour that these folks were fighting. These are unprecedented conditions, and these conditions are not unique to California, to your question. They persist around the globe and across the United States. And so we have to have a state of mind to be even more vigilant, more prepared, and more honest with ourselves about what's really happening. And that's why I'm not walking away from these commitments. And to the extent the President of the United States wants to come in tomorrow to support even more investments, we look forward to that. I embrace it. I thank him for any additional support he can provide with these record-breaking, unprecedented investments that the state has been making for 6 years straight.
Governor, President Trump has called you a failure and says that your policies are causing these fires. What's your bottom line message to him if you get a chance to talk?
Well, I'd replay the last statement. Sincerely, I don't think I could answer it more comprehensively than I did just a moment ago. The rest is politics.
For clarity, when is the last time you talked to Donald Trump, either telephonically or in?
Well, I reached out to him right before he left the White House, December, before January 6th, and it was the first time I didn't get an immediate return phone call. I'd probably talked to him on a consistent basis every week or 2 weeks throughout most of his presidency, at least in my tenure. That was the last time. That was the last time, yeah. And I reached out to him after his election and before this incident. And so I continued to try to reach out. And I think you know this well, of a lot of relationships in the Trump world, a lot of relationships of trust. I communicate with a lot of folks around him, folks that have his ear and influence. I don't want. This is a sideshow, a lot of this stuff, but I know it's the show that would probably be the focus of a little bit too much tomorrow. When all I care about is what we can do together to move past this moment and start rowing in the same direction to get this region back on its feet.
Has anybody, any of your contacts in Silicon Valley who were at the inauguration, have any one of them reached out to you?
I talk to all of them all the time.
Have they given you any indication as to your standing with the president?
Look, this is not about me. This is about the people of the state of California. It has nothing to do with me. We've had issues on emergency response and emergency support from President Trump in 6 states, not California. This predates my tenure as governor. You can look back to his specific quotes about Jerry Brown. You can look back to the specific comments he made about not providing disaster aid under the Brown administration. You can, I don't have to remind you of Puerto Rico or other states, including Georgia, Utah, where this was the same. So I just hope we can sort of expand a consciousness and create a context for this. This is situational. Don't color it in any more than it needs to be. I'm here for the long haul to support the president where we can, to defend our values where we must, to have the backs of diverse communities. At the same time, we work together on critical issues. And let me extend that to one final point. I've been working my tail off to get the largest conveyance project done in California's history, the Delta Conveyance Project. I would love to have the partnership of President Donald Trump. I sat there and I created new environmental waivers and judicial review to get the Sites Dam built in Northern California. The first above-ground dam done. We've been working our tail off. I'd love to have his support. We've invested $8 billion, look this up, $8 billion in infrastructure investments to harden our conveyance system to support water delivery throughout the state of California. We had not done that in decades. That's this administration. I want to continue to do more. So I'm very grateful, in one sense, that the president's so focused on water conveyance in Northern California. I just think he's got something wrong. I don't think it, I know it, as it relates to the state water project having some direct impact here, or somehow that there's been 15 years, as his vice president says, of dams that have been empty when they're at record highs. And so I'd love to have that conversation tomorrow. I don't imagine that's likely. You know how these things go. But I think it could be helpful if we provide that context and that information. And I look forward to working with the president on investments beyond just wildfire recovery. Thank you, guys.
Donald Trump's endorsement on Delta would help you with the legislature?
All right, so Governor Gavin Newsom there in California, in a lengthy kind of back and forth with reporters traveling with him, talking about the extent of the wildfire recovery due to the Eaton and Palisades fire. But the majority of questions were about his relationship with President Donald Trump and their kind of contentious background and past in relation to when Donald Trump was president the first time around, all in anticipation of President Trump's visit tomorrow to California to survey, to see for himself this damage and destruction these wildfires have wrought there in Los Angeles County. So that was the majority of the questions. You noticed that there. But Governor Gavin Newsom saying that he does not want it to be political, that he has the full faith in the federal government, that they will put politics aside and come to the aid of Californians who so desperately need it. And so this will be one of our main stories tomorrow, to see the interaction, the body language, the conversations between Governor Newsom and President Donald Trump here. In